Let's explore what type of SSL certificate we should be using on our very basic website that just provides a simple presence online for our new business. Now, there's a lot of different types of certificates out there, but in relation to what we're trying to achieve in our scenario, there's probably only going to be the three that are on this slide that we really need to look at. So we'll go through these three for now, and in later lessons, we'll explore other types. So we've got an OV, which is an organization validated certificate, and it verifies the identity of the organization. So for example, a business, a non-profit, or a government organization, it's just proving that that organization is the one that's really requesting the certificate. And it can do this through a means of different ways. An EV certificate is an extended validation certificate, and it's just like the OV, the organization validated, as in it verifies the identity of the organization. However, with an EV, an extended validation certificate, there's more checks that go in place to prove that it's definitely that business organization that's requesting the certificate. So it just gives more trust in the certificate, more reliability, and you can really feel like that certificate's been issued to the right company rather than just a simple check. The way that the checks are done do have to meet a certain standard, which is created by the CA browser forum, and we'll explore them on the next slide. A DV, so a domain validated certificate, is the lowest level of validation and therefore the easiest one to acquire. All it does is verifies that whoever requests a certificate controls the domain it protects. So for example, if I owned example.com and I requested a certificate for example.com, the registration authority would just simply check that I am the owner, and it could be done in different ways. Some of them will appear on the next slide possibly. So a good sample of what's expected and outlined by the CAB forum, so the CA browser forum, are these validation rules. Now these are only 10 of them, and if you look in the actual documentation, there's a lot more. So when we're looking at a registration authority, trying to verify that the organization's requested a certificate or a domain has requested a certificate, they will look at these kind of validation routes. So the first one is validating the applicant as a domain contact. So when people register website domains, they tend to provide over information, and that information could be utilized to then get in touch with the owner of the domain. They could try and reach the organization via email, fax, SMS, or postal mail to a domain contact. They could then try and phone the contact with the domain contact. They could construct an email to the domain contact. They could do domain authorization documentation. They could agree upon a change to a website. So let's say nothing major, just maybe something subtle, as in, if you put a file in this location on your web domain, we will check if it's there, and if it is, then it proves that you own it. And it'll be a file in a location that nobody would ever explore, and afterwards you'll be able to delete it. It could be that you make a DNS change to the website domain in agreement with the registration authority. It could be that you change the IP address in agreement with the registration authority, or that they issue a test certificate that you then upload, and it proves that you've got access to the website. Or they could use TLS using a random number just to verify that the web domain is controlled by yourself. So there's a lot of different ways that the registration authorities can prove that somebody or an organization, for example, owns the web domain that the certificate is being requested for. And this information can often be gathered from more places than just the person supplying the request for the certificate. For further exploration of what controls can be put in there, though, there's a reference at the bottom of this slide, so feel free to pause it and copy that out. And when you do, if you put that into a browser, you should see the full requirements for the validation of domains, so that way certificates can be issued. By now, it's probably quite obvious what a registration authority is from the content of this lesson so far. However, I thought it was still a good idea to include a slide in regards to it, just to make sure we all understand exactly what a registration authority is. So what is a registration authority? Well, it's also known as an RA, and it can be a function or a service of a PKI. And that function or service could possibly be an outsourced component. So if we look at this from a different perspective and imagine we're a mid to large size organization with an internal PKI server, and all we're producing is certificates for internal systems. In that regard, when somebody wants a certificate for a system, they'll submit a request, and it's quite possible that the PKI solution is automatically receiving it, automatically approving it, and automatically supplying them with the request. And that decision could possibly be because it's only the IT guys that'll be doing this, and the IT guys run the server, so they're happy for that kind of automation. The other approach is internally, someone will request that certificate, somebody in IT will just have a quick glance and click submit. However, when we start looking at public key infrastructures where we've got public certificate authorities, it's very unlikely that those authorities are going to know your organization or who works for you, and they won't necessarily know who exactly would be best to confirm the identity of that certificate request. So what they'll do is they'll have a registration authority who will find a way to get in touch with your organization and confirm that you or the organization you work for definitely submitted that request for the certificate. The processes on how they do this have been mentioned on the previous slide or two. And the process for what they actually do is quite straightforward. So the registration authority will receive the certificate signing requests, also known as CSRs. They will verify the request through the methods detailed as mentioned previously. And they will forward those CSRs, once verified, to the certificate authority to be signed off. And that is pretty much what a registration authority does. Following on from registration authorities is certificate authorities. So it's a really good topic to cover. So what is a certificate authority? Well, the best way to summarize it is that it's a trusted source that can sign certificates and provide them to the rightful owner. And what we mean by trusted source is, if we go back to an earlier part of this lesson, we were able to see that inside of the internet browsers there were lists of certificate authorities that were trusted, and that therefore means they're trusted by the technology that many people use. And if that trust is misused, or if the certificate authority becomes compromised, then that trusted source or certificate authority may be removed from the internet browsers and no longer trusted. So inherently, all the users of internet browsers are trusting those certificate authorities. So what does a certificate authority actually do? Well, the first thing it does is it tends to sign certificates, but only after they've been verified, so that way the correct owner has been confirmed as the one providing that certificate to be signed. And that's obviously done through the registration authority that we've just discussed. The second thing that a certificate authority can do is they can revoke a certificate. And when they do that, the certificate must then remain on their revocation list until the certificate's original expiration date has passed. Now, when we talk about revocation lists, we're talking about a certificate revocation list known as a CRL, or an online certificate status protocol, which is a protocol that's queried to check if the certificate is still valid. And that's newer technology. The CRL is older technology. Now, we'll get further into those details in future lessons, but for the moment, in regards to what we're trying to achieve in this lesson with our scenario of just getting that first certificate for the website for the business, all we need to know is that a certificate authority is either going to give us that certificate once it's signed, or they're going to tell us something's gone wrong and they're going to revoke that certificate. We just briefly touched on certificate revocation whilst we were talking about certificate authorities there. So what is certificate revocation and why would we use it? Well, certificate revocation is making a certificate no longer valid before its expiration date. So assume we've purchased a certificate that lasts 1 year, but after 6 months we no longer wish to use it. Then at that point, we would tell the certificate authority we want this certificate added to your certificate revocation list. Reasons why we would do this could be that the website domain that we've purchased and purchased the certificate for has expired and we no longer wish to renew it. Another reason could be that the private key we've used with that certificate has become compromised and therefore the certificate itself may be at risk. Now, in addition to this, there are also occurrences where a certificate authority may add a collection of certificates to a certificate revocation list and then inform the users or the owners. A good example would be if a certificate authority suspects that they may have been breached. At that point, the certificates they've signed off and issued could also become susceptible to compromise, and therefore they want to revoke them so that way it doesn't happen. So looking at a revoked certificate in a browser will present something similar to the error message we now have on screen. So if you go to a website, in this case revoke.badssl.com in the example, and if we try to load that website, what we would get is this error message immediately before anything else. And the error message is saying ERR cert revoked, so error certificate being revoked. You can advance, you can click the advance button and continue forward if you wish, but you're being warned at this point that it's using a certificate that's no longer valid, and therefore something has quite probably gone wrong with that certificate, and you should definitely not be trusting it.